Our story begins on July 10th, 1856, in a small village called Smiljan, nestled in what was then the Austrian Empire, now modern-day Croatia. His father, Nikola Tesla, was a Serbian Orthodox priest, a man of deep intellect who filled their home with books and ideas. Milutin wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was a writer and poet, crafting sermons that stirred the soul and penned verses that danced with meaning. He had grand plans for Nikola, dreaming his son would follow in his clerical footsteps, preaching from the pulpit. But Nikola had other ideas that buzzed and sparked like the lightning outside his window. His mother, Georgina Juka Tesla, was the real unsung hero of the family. She never went to school, yet she was a powerhouse of creativity, inventing tools to make her endless chores easier, like a mechanical egg beater she whipped up from scratch. Tesla adored her, later saying, "My mother was an inventor of the first order and would, I believe, have achieved great things had she not been so remote from modern life and its opportunities." Juka's knack for problem solving and her sharp memory rubbed off on Nikola, planting the seeds for his own inventive spirit. He wasn't alone in the family. He had 3 sisters, Milka, Angelina, and Marika, and an older brother, Dane, who was the golden child, brilliant and beloved. But tragedy struck early when Dane died in a horse riding accident at just 12 years old, leaving 7-year-old Nikola reeling. The loss haunted him, and some say it fueled his drive to outshine his brother's memory, to prove he could carry the family's hopes. Growing up in Smiljan, Tesla was surrounded by a world that was both simple and wondrous. The village was rural, with rolling hills and streams, a playground for a boy with a mind that never stopped worrying. From the moment he could toddle, Nikola was different. He had a photographic memory, able to recall entire pages of text after a single glance, and he could crunch numbers in his head faster than most adults could with a pencil. His curiosity was boundless. Every bug, every blade of grass was a mystery to unravel. One day, while watching fireflies blink in the dusk, he wondered what made them glow, a question that lodged itself in his brain and wouldn't let go. That spark of wonder was the first flicker of his obsession with electricity. At 5, he got his hands dirty, building a tiny water wheel in a stream near his house. He'd sit there for hours, mesmerized by how the water spun the wheel, converting motion into something tangible. It was a kid's toy, sure, but it was also a glimpse of the hydroelectric dreams he'd chase later in life. Then there was the time he saw his teacher rub a cat's fur in class, sending little sparks jumping into the air. Nikola's eyes widened, and he pestered his father for an explanation. "That's electricity," Milutin told him. "The same thing that makes lightning." From that moment, Nikola was hooked. Electricity wasn't just a trick. It was a force he wanted to tame. But his childhood wasn't all sunshine and experiments. At 5, Nikola fell gravely ill with cholera, bedridden for 9 months in a fight for his life. His father, desperate to lift his spirits, promised to send him to the best engineering school if he pulled through. That promise lit a fire under Nikola, and he clawed his way back to health, clutching books from Milutin's library to keep his mind alive. He devoured everything: science, math, even poetry, falling in love with the words of Mark Twain and Goethe. Reading became his refuge, especially when another strange illness hit, this time bringing blinding flashes of light and wild hallucinations. These weren't just fever dreams, they were vivid, almost real, and terrifying. Doctors couldn't figure it out, but Nikola did. He taught himself to control them, turning those flashes into a mental sketchpad where he'd later design his inventions. Even as a kid, he was wrestling with his own brain, shaping it into a tool. His adventurous streak got him into trouble too. At 8, he decided to test human flight, climbing onto the barn roof with an umbrella and leaping off. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. He crashed, bruised but unbroken, laughing it off as a lesson learned. Another time, he tried rubbing 2 cats together to make sparks, like his teacher had, only to end up scratched and sparkless. Through it all, his imagination ran wild. Visions of machines and gadgets danced in his head, so clear he sometimes couldn't tell if they were real or not. School came next, and Nikola was a star from the start. At the Higher Real Gymnasium in Karlovac, he blew everyone away. Math problems that stumped his classmates, he solved them in his head. No paper needed. His physics teacher called him a prodigy, feeding his growing love for the natural world. In 1875, at 19, he packed his bags for the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, one of the top engineering schools around. His father's promise had come true, and Nikola threw himself into it. Mechanical engineering, physics, math, even languages and philosophy. He picked up German, French, and Italian like they were nothing, adding them to his native Serbian. Later, he'd master English too, a skill that would open doors across the globe. At Graz, he met Professor Jacob Poschel, a gruff old guy who taught electricity and magnetism. Poschel's lectures were electric, literally. He'd crank up a Graham dynamo, a clunky machine that spat out direct current, and Nikola watched, fascinated but frustrated. The thing sparked and stuttered, losing energy left and right. In a flash, Nikola saw it. Alternating current could fix this, smooth and efficient. He blurted it out in class, but Poschel shot him down. "Impossible," the professor barked. "Like making water flow back and forth instead of steady." Nikola didn't argue, he just filed it away, determined to prove the old man wrong someday. That first year at Graz was golden. Nikola aced every test, worked insane hours, 3 a.m. to 11 p.m., barely sleeping, and earned top marks. But then, things unraveled. In his second year, he discovered gambling, cards, billiards, you name it. He got good, too good, winning big at first, then losing bigger. Money slipped through his fingers, and so did his focus. Grades tanked, his scholarship vanished, and by 1878, he dropped out, too ashamed to tell his family. He drifted to Maribor, picking up a job as a draftsman, but the stress broke him. A nervous breakdown hit, leaving him shaky and lost. After pulling himself together, he landed in Budapest, working at the Central Telephone Exchange. There, tinkering with wires and circuits, he started dreaming up the induction motor, a machine that would run on that alternating current Poschel had scoffed at. In 1880, he moved to Prague, auditing classes at Charles Ferdinand University. No degree, just pure learning. Physics, math, whatever fed his hungry mind. He was a dropout, sure, but he was teaching himself more than any school ever could. Life wasn't done testing him. In 1882, he scored a gig with the Continental Edison Company in Paris, fixing dynamos and motors. It was hands-on, real-world stuff, but it bored him. The company was all about direct current, DC, Thomas Edison's baby. Nikola, though, was an AC guy, convinced it could send power farther, cheaper. Paris felt like a dead end, so he set his sights on America, the land of opportunity. With a letter from his boss, Charles Batchelor, he made his move. The note was gold. "My dear Edison, I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." In June 1884, Nikola boarded the SS City of Richmond, crossing the Atlantic with 4 cents, a poetry book, and a head buzzing with ideas. The trip was quiet, a chance to think, to leave Europe behind. When he hit New York City, it was a shock. Gritty, loud, nothing like the old world charm he knew. He wrote later, "What I had left was beautiful, artistic, and fascinating in every way. What I saw here was machined, rough, and unattractive. It was a different world," but he didn't flinch. He marched to Edison's office, handed over that letter, and got hired on the spot at the Edison Machine Works. His job? Make DC generators better. He did it too, but he couldn't shake his AC dreams. Edison was a DC diehard, and Nikola knew they'd clash eventually. For now, though, he was in. 28 years old. Broke but brilliant, standing on the edge of something huge. Tesla didn't waste time making his mark. He arrived armed with a letter of recommendation from Charles Batchelor, his former boss in Paris, addressed to none other than Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, and America's reigning king of invention. The note was glowing. "My dear Edison, I know two great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." Edison was a household name by then, a larger-than-life figure who'd given the world the phonograph and turned the light bulb into a practical wonder. His latest mission? Wiring cities with direct current, DC, electricity, a system that powered homes and businesses with a steady, one-way flow of energy. Tesla walked into Edison's office at 65 Fifth Avenue, handed over the letter, and scored a gig tinkering with Edison's DC generators. These hulking machines were the beating heart of Edison's power stations, churning out electricity for New York's elite. But they were far from perfect, prone to breakdowns and woefully inefficient. For Tesla, it was a golden opportunity to flex his skills. He threw himself into the work, often laboring late into the night, his lanky frame hunched over gears and wires. Edison couldn't help but notice the new guy's talent, but there was a storm brewing beneath the surface. See, Edison's DC system had a fatal flaw. It lost power over distance. Imagine electricity like water running through a hose. DC was a straight shot that weakened the farther it traveled. To light up a city, you'd need a power station every mile or so, an expensive and impractical mess. Tesla, though, had a different vision, one he'd been nursing since his university days in Europe. He was obsessed with alternating current, AC, a system where electricity oscillates back and forth dozens of times a second. With the right transformers, AC could be cranked up to high voltages for long-distance transmission, then stepped down for safe use in homes. It was elegant, efficient, and, in Tesla's mind, the future. But Edison? He wasn't buying it. DC was his baby, his empire, and he saw AC as a threat. Tesla might have been brilliant, but to Edison, he was just a hired hand with wild ideas. The tension between them wasn't just technical, it was personal. Edison was the quintessential American inventor. Brash, practical, and driven by profit. He famously said, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." And he lived it, churning out inventions with a factory-like efficiency. Tesla, on the other hand, was a dreamer, a lanky eccentric with piercing eyes and a mind that raced ahead of his time. He believed in perfecting ideas in his head before ever touching a tool, a stark contrast to Edison's hands-on hustle. Their clash was inevitable, and it came to a head with a story that's become legend, though its truth is debated. Word has it Edison promised Tesla $50,000, a massive sum, worth over $1 million today, to overhaul those troublesome DC generators. Tesla took the challenge seriously, pouring weeks into redesigning them from the ground up. When he was done, the machines ran smoother, stronger, and more reliably than ever. Proud of his work, he went to Edison for the payout. Edison's response? A chuckle and a quip. "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor. Whether it was a real promise or a cruel jest, Tesla felt betrayed. That moment lit a fuse. He packed up his tools and walked out, leaving Edison's world behind. It was a bold move for a man with no money and no safety net. But Tesla wasn't wired to play it safe. He was ready to bet everything on AC, even if it meant starting from scratch. Life got tough fast. Out on his own, Tesla scraped by, digging ditches for $2 a day. A humbling fall for a mind like his. But in 1885, fate threw him a lifeline. Two businessmen, Alfred Brown and Charles Peck, caught wind of his talents and decided to take a chance on him. They bankrolled the Tesla Electric Company and gave him a lab on Liberty Street, a scrappy little space where his dreams could take root. There, Tesla threw himself into solving a puzzle that had stumped engineers for years: how to make AC power machinery. The problem was AC's constant flipping. It was great for lighting, but tricky for motors. Tesla cracked it with a stroke of genius: the induction motor. Picture this. An AC current creates a rotating magnetic field that spins a rotor without any physical connection. No brushes, no wear, just pure, elegant efficiency. It was a game changer, and by 1887, Tesla had patented a complete AC system: motors, generators, transformers, the works. Suddenly, he had the blueprint to electrify the world. Enter George Westinghouse, a burly industrialist who'd made a fortune in railroads and saw the same potential in AC that Tesla did. In 1888, Westinghouse swooped in, buying Tesla's patents for $60,000 in cash plus royalties, $2.50 for every horsepower generated. It was a deal that pulled Tesla out of the gutter and set him on a collision course with Edison. With Westinghouse as his ally, Tesla had the muscle to take AC to the masses. But Edison wasn't about to let his DC empire crumble without a fight. What kicked off next was the War of Currents, a brutal showdown of technology, egos, and outright propaganda. Edison went on the offensive, determined to paint AC as a killer. He argued it was too dangerous for homes, claiming its high voltages would fry anyone who got near it. To drive the point home, he staged grisly public stunts, hiring a shady engineer named Harold Brown to electrocute animals with AC power. Stray dogs, horses, even an elephant named Topsy at Coney Island met their end in front of horrified crowds, all to scare people away from Tesla's system. Edison's team didn't stop there. In 1890, they lobbied to make AC the juice for the first electric chair, a grim spectacle that ended with a botched execution and a new slang term: getting Westinghoused. It was dark, dirty, and desperate, but it showed how far Edison would go to protect his turf. Tesla and Westinghouse, though, weren't fazed. They knew AC's advantages: its ability to travel long distances cheaply and safely with the right equipment, would win out if they could just prove it. The chance came in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair, a dazzling showcase of human progress. Officially called the World's Columbian Exposition, it drew 27 million visitors to a white city of gleaming buildings and cutting-edge wonders. Edison bid over $1 million to light it with DC, but Westinghouse undercut him with a $500,000 AC proposal, thanks to its lower costs. When the fair opened, Tesla's system stole the show. Over 100,000 bulbs blazed to life, casting a glow that banished the flicker of gas lamps. There was the first Ferris wheel, exotic pavilions, and a sea of lights that left visitors, like one who called it a vision of heaven, speechless. It was proof AC could deliver, and it shifted the tide in Tesla's favor. The knockout punch landed at Niagara Falls. Tesla had fantasized about taming those thundering waters since he was a kid, sketching plans in the dirt back in Serbia. In 1895, Westinghouse won the contract to build the first major hydroelectric plant there, and Tesla's AC designs were the star. It was a Herculean task. Engineers had to craft turbines tough enough to harness the fall's raw power and generators that could turn it into electricity. Tesla's polyphase AC system was the perfect fit, letting them send power 20 miles to Buffalo with barely a hiccup. When the plant hummed to life in 1896, it was a watershed moment, literally. Clean, limitless energy flowed to cities, factories, and homes, all thanks to AC's long-distance magic. Tesla stood on the brink of the falls and called it a monument worthy of our scientific age. And he wasn't wrong. Niagara cemented AC as the global standard, relegating Edison's DC to a fading footnote. The war was over, and Tesla had won, not just a battle of currents, but a victory for the future. With AC on top, Tesla could have rested, but his mind was already racing to new horizons. In 1891, he unveiled the Tesla Coil, a wild contraption of wound coils topped with a metal sphere that could churn out millions of volts. It was a lightning machine, spitting arcs of electricity that crackled through the air. Crowds gasped as Tesla held bulbs that glowed without wires, their light dancing in his hands. It wasn't just theatrics. The coil used high-frequency voltage to push electricity wirelessly, laying the groundwork for radio and more. Today, you'll find Tesla coils in everything from X-ray machines to TV circuits, and kids still build tiny versions for science fairs. Back then, it was Tesla flexing electricity's untapped potential, showing the world what he could do when he let loose. His next leap was even bolder: wireless power. In 1898, he stunned audiences at Madison Square Garden with a remote-controlled boat, steering it across a pool with radio waves. People whispered, "Witchcraft." But Tesla grinned. This was the dawn of wireless communication. He'd filed radio patents years before Guglielmo Marconi, who'd later snagged the Nobel Prize for it. Tesla didn't care about the credit, saying, "The future for which I have really worked is mine." He wasn't wrong. Radio's roots trace straight back to him. Then came Colorado Springs in 1899, where Tesla took his wireless dreams to the edge. In a lab on the wide-open plains, he built a monster Tesla coil, 52 feet wide, 142 feet tall, a tower of raw ambition. One stormy night, he flipped the switch and the sky erupted. Lightning tore through the darkness as he lit 200 bulbs 26 miles away, all without a single wire. It was a triumph, until it shorted out the local power grid, leaving the town dark and Tesla sheepishly apologizing. Still, it fueled his wildest vision yet: a global network of towers beaming free energy to every corner of the planet. In 1901, he broke ground on the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, a 187-foot behemoth backed by financier J.P. Morgan. It was meant to send power and messages worldwide, no cables needed. Tesla claimed he'd even picked up signals from Mars out in Colorado, probably just static, but it showed his cosmic curiosity. Wardenclyffe was his masterpiece, but money ran dry. Morgan pulled out, investors vanished, and by 1917, the tower was torn down for scrap. It broke Tesla's heart, but his wireless ideas weren't dead. They echo in today's Wi-Fi, wireless charging, and beyond. By now, Tesla was a celebrity. He dined with tycoons, lectured to packed halls, and cut a striking figure, tall, impeccably dressed, with a quiet charisma that turned heads. Women adored him, but he brushed off romance, insisting his work demanded total devotion. He was quirky too, feeding pigeons like they were old friends, dodging germs with a paranoia that bordered on obsession, and sleeping just 2 hours a night. Money was his kryptonite. He'd given up millions in royalties to bail Westinghouse out of a jam, lived large in ritzy hotels like the Waldorf Astoria, and by 1915, he was flat broke. Yet he never stopped inventing. He sketched a bladeless turbine that spun on air friction, pitched radar decades before it caught on, and even dreamed up a death ray, a particle beam he called teleforce that he swore could end wars. The FBI took notice after his death, but no plans were ever found. Tesla was a man out of sync with his era, too far ahead for the world to follow. By the 1910s, Nikola Tesla was a household name, a living legend whose inventions had transformed modern life. But fame doesn't pay the rent, and Tesla's fortunes had taken a sharp dive. His patents had made millionaires out of others. George Westinghouse, for one, owed his empire to Tesla's alternating current system, but Tesla himself had little to show for it. Back in the 1890s, he'd made a selfless choice that would haunt him. When Westinghouse faced financial ruin, Tesla tore up a lucrative royalty contract that could have earned him millions, saying he'd rather see his technology thrive than watch his friend fail. It was a noble gesture, but it left him vulnerable. Now, decades later, he was scraping by, funding wild experiments with whatever cash he could muster and racking up debts he couldn't pay. He became a nomad of New York's hotel scene, moving from the Governor Clinton to the St. Regis to the Hotel Pennsylvania. always one step ahead of the bill collectors. He'd charm the staff with his old-world manners and promises of future riches, but eventually, the tab would grow too large, and he'd slip away to the next place. It was a stark contrast to his heyday, when he dined at the fanciest restaurants like Delmonico's, trading laughs with literary giant Mark Twain over champagne and caviar. Speaking of Twain, let's pause for a quirky detour into one of Tesla's most unexpected friendships. The two couldn't have been more different. Twain, the folksy humorist with a cigar in hand, and Tesla, the meticulous inventor with a mind full of equations. But they clicked. Twain was a regular at Tesla's lab, fascinated by the sparks and gizmos. Once, he even volunteered to stand on a platform while Tesla zapped him with high-frequency currents just to feel the buzz. He walked away grinning, unharmed, and Tesla beamed with pride. Tesla, meanwhile, had a soft spot for Twain's writing. As a sickly kid in Serbia, he devoured Twain's books, later claiming they'd lifted his spirits and helped him recover. Their bond was a rare glimmer of warmth in Tesla's later years, a reminder of the days when he was the toast of the town, not a ghost drifting through it. But those glory days were fading fast. Tesla's grandest dream, the Wardenclyffe Tower, had crashed and burned. Literally. This massive structure on Long Island was meant to be his masterpiece, a station that could transmit wireless power and messages across the globe. He'd sunk everything into it: money, time, hope, envisioning a world where energy flowed freely, no wires required. But by 1917, the dream was dead. Funding from J.P. Morgan and others had dried up, and the tower was dismantled. Its steel sold for scrap to settle Tesla's debts. It was a crushing blow. He'd walk past the site sometimes, staring at the empty lot where his future once stood, a hollow look in his eyes. Still, he refused to give up. He pitched new inventions to anyone who'd listen: a bladeless turbine that harnessed air friction to generate power, a vertical takeoff aircraft that could leap into the sky, and a mysterious teleforce weapon, a particle beam he claimed could vaporize enemy planes from hundreds of miles away. The newspapers ate it up, calling it his death ray, and it sparked whispers of science fiction come to life. But investors stayed away. Tesla's ideas were too bold, too far ahead of their time, and his reputation had taken a hit. He was starting to look like a relic, a mad genius from a bygone era. The press didn't help. In 1915, a rumor swirled that Tesla and Edison were set to share the Nobel Prize in physics, a poetic twist for two old rivals. Tesla played it cool, saying awards didn't matter, but you can bet he felt the sting when the story turned out to be false. The prize went to William Henry Bragg and his son instead, for their work on X-rays. Another slap came from Guglielmo Marconi, who'd built a radio empire on Tesla's foundational patents and snagged the Nobel in 1909. Tesla was furious. "Marconi is a good fellow," he'd say with a smirk. "Let him continue. He is using 17 of my patents." Tesla had demonstrated radio principles as early as 1893, years before Marconi's famous transmissions, and he fought to set the record straight. He sued, and in 1943, months after his death, the U.S. Supreme Court finally ruled that Tesla's patents took precedence. Vindication at last, but it came too late to change his life. By then, the world had moved on, and Tesla was a footnote in a story he'd helped write. Money wasn't Tesla's only struggle. His personal life was a puzzle too. He never married, insisting that love and invention didn't mix. "I have decided to dedicate my life to science," he once said, "and for that reason, I believe celibacy is the right path." He argued that history's greatest inventors, like Newton and Beethoven, were bachelors, and he wasn't wrong to point out the pattern. But it left him isolated. With no family to lean on, he found companionship in an unlikely place: pigeons. Every day, he'd head to Bryant Park or his hotel window, scattering crumbs for the birds. He'd rescue the injured ones, nursing them with a gentleness that surprised those who knew him as a cold, calculating genius. One pigeon, a white one with gray-tipped wings, became his obsession. "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman," he confessed, "and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life. When she died, he was devastated, saying a light had gone out of his world." It sounds strange, but it was pure Tesla, intense, emotional, and a little offbeat. His quirks didn't stop there. Tesla was a walking bundle of oddities. He couldn't stand pearls. Seeing them on a woman made him shudder. He refused to touch human hair, even his own, and had a phobia of germs that bordered on obsession. Before meals, he'd polish his silverware with a stack of 18 napkins, always 18, because he was fixated on numbers divisible by 3. He'd calculate the cubic volume of his food before eating, a habit that baffled dinner guests. Each day, he'd walk exactly 27 laps around the block, another nod to his love of threes. Yet, for all his eccentricities, he could turn on the charm when he wanted. He spoke 8 languages: Serbian, English, German, French, Italian, Czech, Hungarian, and Latin, and had a soft, melodic voice that drew people in. He'd recite Goethe's poetry from memory, crack dry jokes, and spin tales of his inventions with a twinkle in his eye. But as the years piled up, that twinkle faded. He retreated into himself, a tall, gaunt figure in a worn-out suit, scribbling equations on napkins in hotel lobbies. Even in decline, Tesla's imagination never quit. In the 1920s and 30s, he kept dreaming up wild ideas: a flying stove that hovered like a proto-helicopter, a device to photograph human thoughts, a plan to ping radio waves off the moon. Some were visionary. He predicted a world where wireless messages could be transmitted so simply that any individual could carry and operate his own apparatus. Sound familiar? That's your smartphone, folks. He foresaw drones, renewable energy, even a global communication grid, but his days of big experiments were over. He lived on scraps, royalty payments from his Yugoslav patents, the odd lecture fee, and, starting in 1934, a $125 monthly stipend from Westinghouse, equivalent to about $2,500 today. It wasn't much, but it kept him in hotels and birdseed. He spent his final years in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, a modest 2-room suite where he'd tinker with gadgets and pen letters to world leaders, pitching ideas for peace and progress. His health faded, his 6'2" frame shrank, his suits hung loose, but his mind stayed sharp to the end. On January 7, 1943, a maid found Tesla dead in his bed, aged 86. The official cause was coronary thrombosis, a heart condition, but he'd been slipping away for years, worn out by a life of relentless work and little rest. His death made the papers, but the world barely paused. The New York Times ran an obituary praising his great intellect, but his funeral at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine was modest, attended by a handful of friends and admirers. He was cremated, and his ashes later sent to Belgrade, where they sit today in a golden sphere at the Nikola Tesla Museum. It was a quiet end for a man who'd once set the world ablaze. But Tesla's story didn't end there. Within hours of his death, the FBI swooped in, confiscating his papers under the Alien Property Act, despite his U.S. citizenship since 1891. Rumors flew that he'd been designing secret weapons, maybe even that death ray he'd bragged about. His nephew, Sava Kosanovic, battled to reclaim the documents, eventually shipping them to Yugoslavia. In the 1950s, the U.S. declassified them, revealing a mix of brilliance and oddity: sketches for radar-like systems, notes on vertical takeoff planes, and a so-called earthquake machine, a small oscillator he once claimed had rattled a building. Spoiler, it didn't. No superweapons turned up, but the intrigue stuck, sparking tales of lost inventions and government cover-ups that still swirl today. So, what did Tesla leave us? Look around. You're living in his world. Flip a light switch, and AC power surges through your home. Tune a radio, and you're riding waves he pioneered. Scroll your phone, and you're touching his wireless vision. His name lives on in Tesla Motors, though Elon Musk says it's more a tribute than a direct tie. In pop culture, he's a rock star of science. David Bowie brought him to life in the Prestige, all mystery and charisma. His real legacy, though, is in the numbers. Over 300 patents, from AC motors to radio tech to early robotics. He joined the Inventors Hall of Fame in 1975, and the Tesla unit of magnetic flux density bears his name. But beyond the gadgets, Tesla taught us to dream bigger than the world allows. The present is theirs, he said. The future, for which I really worked, is mine. He was right. We're basking in that future now, and it's electric because of him. It's January 7th, 1943, in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan. Nikola Tesla, now 86, takes his final breath in a modest room far removed from the spotlight he once commanded. World War II is raging. Tanks are rolling, bombs are dropping, and the world's attention is glued to the chaos. Tesla's death barely makes a ripple. A brief obituary notes the passing of an eccentric inventor, and that's that. He leaves behind no family, no fortune, just a collection of papers, a few belongings, and a pigeon he'd grown fond of feeding in his final days. It's a quiet, almost poetic end for a man whose life was anything but subtle. But here's the twist. Tesla's story doesn't end in that hotel room. Over the decades, his name has roared back to life, transforming from a historical footnote into a global icon. So how did a man who died in obscurity become one of the most celebrated figures in science and culture? Let's break it down. First, let's talk about the technology. If you're watching this video right now, you're surrounded by Tesla's fingerprints. That smartphone or laptop streaming my voice. It owes a debt to Tesla's experiments with wireless communication. Way back in 1898, he stunned onlookers by steering a small boat across a pool using radio waves, a remote-controlled marvel that had people whispering about sorcery. That wasn't magic. It was the birth of radio control, a technology that's evolved into the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and drone systems we rely on today. Every time you skip a cord and charge your phone wirelessly, you're living Tesla's dream of a world unbound by wires. His famous Tesla coils, those crackling, lightning-spewing machines, weren't just for show either. They explored high-frequency currents and resonance, ideas that paved the way for modern wireless power. But the crown jewel of Tesla's legacy is alternating current. Flip a switch, charge your electric car, or cool your house with AC. You're tapping into the system Tesla championed against all odds. In the late 19th century, electricity was a mess of short-range direct current, DC, setups, courtesy of Edison. Tesla's AC changed everything, allowing power to travel vast distances efficiently. Partnering with George Westinghouse, he won the War of the Currents, lighting up the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and proving AC was the future. Today, it's the backbone of the global power grid, delivering energy to billions. Every hum of electricity in your walls is a silent tribute to Tesla's victory. And he didn't stop there. Tesla was a pioneer of renewable energy before it had a name. In the 1890s, he envisioned harnessing the Earth's natural forces, solar, wind, geothermal, to power humanity. The sun is the past, the Earth is the present, the moon is the future, he once mused, pointing to a sustainable world we're only now racing to build. Solar panels on rooftops, wind turbines spinning in the breeze. They're echoes of Tesla's foresight. He even speculated about drawing energy from the ionosphere, a wild idea that's inspired modern experiments in atmospheric power. Then there's automation. His 1898 teleautomaton was a radio-guided machine, a distant ancestor of today's self-driving cars and robots. Tesla didn't just invent gadgets, he planted the seeds for entire industries. Tesla's life was so extraordinary that it's no surprise it's been wrapped in layers of myth. Take the earthquake machine story. Legend says he built a tiny oscillator, hooked it to a building, and nearly shook it apart. The reality? He did tinker with mechanical resonance, finding a frequency to amplify vibrations. But there's no proof he caused a quake. Still, it's a tale that sticks, painting him as a wizard of chaos. Then there's the death ray, or teleforce, a supposed particle beam weapon that could zap enemies from the sky. Tesla pitched it as a tool for peace, a defense so strong it'd end war. After his death, the FBI grabbed his papers, hunting for clues, but no death ray turned up. Was it real? Likely not, but it fuels the mystique. And how about those Martian signals? In 1899, at his Colorado Springs lab, Tesla picked up odd pulses on his receivers and wondered if aliens were calling. Scientists later chalked it up to natural radio waves from Jupiter, but it shows how his mind leaped beyond the ordinary. These stories have turned Tesla into a pop culture titan. In The Prestige, David Bowie plays him as a cryptic genius, bending reality with his inventions. Video games like Assassin's Creed cast him as a shadowy mastermind, while The Order, 1886, imagines his tech powering a steampunk world. His name graces songs, books, and even Elon Musk's Tesla Motors, a nod to his AC motor work and green energy vision. Musk's electric cars, silent, powerful, wire-free, would have thrilled Tesla, who dreamed of a cleaner, smarter future. From Hollywood to Silicon Valley, Tesla's larger-than-life persona keeps growing. Tesla's ideas aren't just history. They're fueling tomorrow. Elon Musk's SpaceX, with its reusable rockets, channels Tesla's boundary-pushing spirit. Tesla once proposed using high-frequency waves to talk to other planets. Today, radio telescopes scan the cosmos, echoing his curiosity. Wireless power, a Tesla obsession, is becoming real with companies like Ytricity, which use magnetic resonance, his old playground, to charge electric vehicles without plugs. And as climate change looms, Tesla's renewable energy dreams are more urgent than ever. Solar farms, wind power, even far-out ideas like space-based solar panels, all trace back to his vision of tapping nature's abundance. But Tesla's true legacy might be in how he thought. He was a mental architect, building machines in his imagination before touching a tool. He'd run his inventions in his mind, tweaking them until they worked, a trick modern engineers mimic with software. He also lived for the long game, famously tearing up a royalty deal to save Westinghouse, betting that AC's spread would outshine any paycheck. It's a mindset that challenges today's tech world to think beyond profit, toward impact. Tesla's later years weren't glamorous. After his Wardenclyffe Tower, a bold bid to transmit wireless power, collapsed in 1906, he spiraled. He lived on credit, fed pigeons, and pitched ideas that sounded more like sci-fi than science. He died broke and alone, dismissed by many as a relic. Yet, he never lost faith in human potential. "The desire that guides me," he said, "is to harness the forces of nature to the service of mankind. That passion, not his patents, is his real gift to us." So what's Tesla's lesson? It's simple. Dream big, think different, and don't fear the unknown. He wasn't flawless, quirky, stubborn, and a lousy businessman, but he was fearless. In a world that loves the safe bet, Tesla bet on the impossible. His legacy isn't just in power lines or Wi-Fi signals. It's in the spark of curiosity he ignites in us all. Thanks for joining us on this journey through his life. If you've loved this series, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more. As Tesla might say, the future's yours, go make it electric.